make the scheme cost efficient. So for the state, we often say that energy efficiency obligation schemes are great because they are financed through private funds. And this is quite true. The thing is, you still need an investment from the state in order to, either to delegate or to regulate itself the scheme. And it is really, really important to create a scheme that is going to generate energy savings at minimum administrative costs and within reasonable delays. What we've seen within the French scheme is that the level of the obligation got big quite fast. Over 10 years. It was multiplied by 12. And this requires quite a lot of people to process the energy saving certificates applications. And it can take a lot of time if you have to ask for complements for proofs that were not provided, if there are mistakes within the applications, etc. And if you want your scheme to work, you have to have answers in reasonable delays. So yes, we realized that we had very long delays and that this was a really important problem in the scheme running. So we are still dealing with it. We've introduced several novelty to deal with that, especially standardized procedures. We are also going through dematerialization of applications, so everything by cloud. We also have introduced ex post control and high sanctions in order to check only samples of the applications, but with very high sanctions in order to discourage fraud, etc. So yeah, it's quite a challenge to have something that is at minimum administrative cost, but that is really robust and really well monitored. So cost efficiency for the state, first point, but also cost efficiency for obligated parties. And we've tried to make sure that obligated parties could really deal with their obligation in the more cost efficient way possible. And for that, we've given them the freedom to either manage their obligation, so they can implement energy efficiency savings in order to comply with the obligation, or they can delegate it. They can, it is an official procedure. They need to send a letter to the ministry to say, okay, I'm going to delegate my obligation entirely or partly to that person. We also given them freedom to either implement energy savings or buy energy saving certificates on the market. We have what we call eligible parties, which are the local authorities and social landlords, to make it short. And these people do not have an obligation, but they can get energy saving certificates for the energy efficiency operations they implement, and then they can sell this energy saving certificate on the market. So we've created the condition for a market, and this is how, obligated parties can choose whether they're going to do stuff themselves or buy certificates on the market. And finally, we've given them the freedom to target any sector, any energy, and any consumers. So basically, EDF, which is the main electricity provider, can implement operation to save energy in the transport sector. At the opposite, Total, which is one of the main automotive fuel providers, works a lot in the building sector, on the residential sector. And what's interesting is that they can all do that depending on their interests, on their strategies. And this is one, I guess, of the main benefit from the scheme for obligated parties. They can, for instance, create a better loyalty among their customers by promoting the scheme, by providing technical assistance, technical advising, and then subsidies. We have a study that shows that when consumers are only looking for subsidies, they have no loyalty at all. They will go to the one that provides a better subsidy. But when they need technical advice, they usually stick to their energy consumer because they have a long-term relationship with it, and they feel more confident with this provider. And so yes, clearly there is better loyalty when you provide that kind of services to your energy consumers. Finally, I said a simple, a cost-efficient, and finally a flexible scheme. I guess this is really a keyword, flexibility. We all have national contexts that are quite different and that can vary a lot depending on the period. We've all been through a major crisis, economical and financial crisis, and this can change a lot. What are your national priorities? You can have a shift in national priorities. You can have changing policies, changing government, and in order for something as complex as an EEO to last, you need it to be very flexible in order to adapt to new national context, new priorities, new policies. You also needed to be flexible to adapt to EU directives that can have quite a huge impact on how you're running your EEO. Basically for the current period, we had to adapt a lot of things within our EU to comply with both the EEG and the Eco-Design Directive. Yes, you need to be able to do that. And finally, you need something flexible because the energy efficiency word is like constantly moving, constantly going on. So you need to adapt to new technologies. You need to be able to increase the baselines, etc. One lesson we've learned is that you also need to leave room for innovative business model. The French EU has triggered, I guess, a great development of the ESCO market around this scheme, and you need to let these ESCOs some room within the scheme because they've proven quite efficient in producing energy savings and energy saving certificates, and they are really important actors of our scheme. You need to leave room for innovative technologies. We've talked before of standardized operations that make the scheme simple. Well, the fact is, if you want to standardize something, you need to know it very well. So it's only going to be very usual elementary operation. Well, where is the room for innovation in that? Well, we deal with it within specific operations. So for anything that can't be standardized, you can apply for energy saving certificates within the specific operation procedures. And I think it's, even if right now it's not most of the savings we have within the scheme, it is important to leave this door open for innovation, especially if we see that some innovation come back a lot, at some point we have enough data to standardize it. So I guess it's a way to mainstream some innovations that will be basic, I guess, tomorrow. And leave room for third parties. That's what I said about innovative business model, but third parties are really important within the French scheme. I talked about the delegation of obligation. We also have kind of the same for eligible parties, for local authorities that would like to benefit from the scheme and then to want to get energy saving certificates for themselves, but they don't have the ability to do it themselves. They tend to mandate to sign a contract with a third party that's going to deal with the energy saving certificate for them. So we have a great deal of ESCOs that were created in order to provide services to both obligated parties, eligible parties, and to be intermediaries either towards households or enterprises. Finally, this is where the trick is, you need to allow the possibility to make rules change when needed. For instance, you might have situations where the scheme is not working as well as it could because context changes, because lots of things changes. And for instance, right now on the French energy saving certificate market, we have a price that is half what it used to be 2 years ago. And this is quite a problem. And well, we don't have much flexibility in that case to make sure that the market goes up again and that it is a real incentive again for all eligible parties and for all potential beneficiaries to get involved in energy efficiency operations. So yes, allows the possibility to make rules change when needed, but that's not really compatible with long-term visibility. So yes, EEOs are a challenge. That's not big news. Allows the possibility to make rules change if you also want to target specific segments. For instance, fuel poor households. We recently introduced a new obligation, a dedicated obligation to target fuel poor households because we realized outside of dedicated programs led by social landlords or dedicated agency or association, fuel poor households do not have access to the energy saving certificate scheme for the only reason that the rest, what you have to finance even after you've received a subsidy from the energy saving certificate, is too high for them to fund. So yeah, we are afraid that this scheme was not doing enough for this fuel poor household, and so we introduced a new obligation. And that's what I mean when I say leave room for new possibilities when you're learning about what the scheme can and can't do. Yes, you might need to introduce new rules to make sure everybody can benefit from the scheme. I think I've said what I meant to say. Maybe just one last point. What we've seen within the French EEO is that at first, most of the operations were implemented in the building sector, mainly the residential sector. And what we're seeing is that the obligation keeps increasing, but what the savings we are generating in the residential sector stay the same. And so if we want to continue increasing our level of obligation, our level of expectation, we need to diversify the source of energy savings. And so yes, the building sector will remain one of the main targets of the energy efficiency obligation scheme in France. But we are seeing that the industry sectors, the tertiary sector, and even the agricultural sector are taking more and more room within the scheme, and that we have cost-efficient energy efficiency measures to implement in all sectors, even if it's easy, I guess easier at least, to deal with the building sector because it's something that's really well known. We've seen over the last period that there are a lot of things to do in other sector. It might be important not to look only to the building sector, but to the broad picture. All right, I'm done. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm available for questions.
Thank you very much, Elodie. You will find some questions in the chat panel, on your control panel.
Yes. Okay, I'm interested to know whether the French scheme changes in each of the obligation periods shown on the different slides. Yeah, so at the end of each obligation period, we kind of organize a broad consultation with all stakeholders, and we discuss on what should change, what should remain the same from one period to another. So for instance, one thing that did change during the first period, every entity was eligible. So if you were an enterprise, if you were an association, anything, you could be eligible to white certificates if you implemented energy saving operations. And that proved very, very difficult to manage because the managing authorities had to deal with thousands and thousands of people. So in the second period, we said, okay, we're going to restrict the eligibility to only local authorities and social landlords. And it's going to make the scheme much simpler. And for all other beneficiaries, they can still benefit from the scheme, but they have to go through either unobligated parties or uneligible parties. And that's the kind of discussion we have at the end of each obligated, period of obligation. One of the main points is, of course, the level of the obligation, but we also discuss of any important specifications of the scheme. Whether scheme, no, sorry. Sorry, there's lots of. In Okay, so there's one question on the market. How, in a white certificate scheme, in which certificates can be traded, can you ensure that the certificate market is working? Well, it's a problem. If it's a proper market, you can't ensure much. And lately we have a problem with prices because basically they offer excess demands, so prices really dropped, and it's a huge problem for entity wanted to launch new investment, or even for entities that launched investment counting on the energy saving certificates, who are now worth half what they used to be worth. The fact that there is a market also poses a question of responsibility, because when an obligated party implement, finance or provide advising for a certain number of operations, if then it sells the corresponding certificates, who is responsible for the quality and everything that happened with these certificates? So within the French rules, we've decided that the first applicant for the certificates is responsible for any problem linked to the certificates, but it can delegate responsibilities. And one last point we have, but that's really specific to the French scheme, is that it's not a real marketplace, so we don't have a complete transparency on the prices that are at which the certificates are sold. When there is a sale, the buyer and the seller have to declare at what price the transaction happened, but it's only declarative. So we have little insurance that this is the actual price at which the transaction happened. So yeah, it is a difficult subject, but it does introduce a lot of flexibility. So, and it does create the condition for ESCOs to develop too. So yeah, I guess it has its strengths and its weaknesses. So yes, regarding the scheme's governance, I guess stakeholders are not making the final decision, but they can provide lots of inputs. We have twice a year a committee meeting, including all stakeholders, where everything that's going on is presented. I guess it's more consultative than anything, but yeah, twice a year they get a real time to speak with the ministry, with ADEME, to discuss any subject that is a problem. And we also involve them a lot in the establishment of the standardized catalog, which is really the core of the scheme. We have working group, and any stakeholders that want to get involved is involved in this working group. So I guess that's how they are involved. At the end of the day, the ministry takes decisions, but we do try to have as much consultations as possible regarding any important matter. Is delegating obligations easy? Well, we have a few rules because we didn't want to have too many delegations. So you can either delegate all your obligation, or you can delegate part of it, but only by block of 5 terawatt-hour, which doesn't mean much to you. But yeah, there are a few rules, but except from that, it's quite easy. It's only a letter you send to the ministry saying, okay, I'm going to delegate that much of my obligation to that person. And the administration has 2 months to answer you. If you get no answer, it's okay. It's done. And basically, once you have if you delegate the entirety of your obligation, you're not obligated anymore, and the delegate party is the obligated party. The only limit to that is that if the delegate party not fail, but if it goes bankrupt and it does not exist anymore, the obligation goes back to the initial obligated party. One more question. Okay. So another question on delegation. Before in the second period, we didn't have the notion of delegation, but we had the notion of collective approach, and basically several obligated parties could put their obligation together to deal with it together. And so basically people that are today receiving delegation used to be dealing with this collective approach. So it's not that many actors, and they are quite solid, quite strong. And so far I haven't known of any bad experience. One of our main ESCOs had a few problems lately due to the low price on the market, but for now they're holding on, so we hope it's going to stay this way. But yeah, we could imagine that they go bankrupt, and in this case, there could be many problems for the obligated parties that delegate the obligations and that have no setup at all, no partnership, no anything to comply with the obligation because they delegated the obligation. But yeah, I have no information on any problem so far, and I have my fingers crossed it's going to stay this way for the future. There is no obligation market. There's only a certificate market. How do you make sure that people cooperate? You can't. That's the principle of cooperation. You can't force it. But I guess actors have realized that they're better off cooperating, giving them their advice, even if sometimes we can't take into account their advice, than saying nothing. And what we've seen also is that all these stakeholders are getting organized. We have huge federations and lobbies in the industrial sector, in all categories of stakeholders. What we see is that they're getting organized, and this cooperation also helps them to work together. So basically now, yes, Total and EDF work together on certain subjects, and even if they are on very different energy vectors, and at the same time we have actors as different as energy efficiency measure installers and Total working together to have the right thing implemented. So I guess it's not, you can't make them cooperate, but you can show them the interest they have to cooperate. Oh, so what's the interest of the scheme for households? Well, the way it works, usually the obligated parties is going to give a subsidy or technical advising or a free energy audit to the households in exchange for its right to claim energy saving certificates. So that's how they get interested, because they can either get a little subsidy or some technical advice to work on their project. It can be a loan, also a low rate loan, etc. So right now we are at €2 per megawatt QMAC. So that would be 0.02 euro cent per kilowatt QMAC. We talk about QMAC because we look at cumulative and actualized energy savings. And so yeah, it dropped because yes, as I said, we have too much offer and not enough demand. The managing authorities is delivering more and more energy saving certificates, and at the same time, obligated parties are quite confident they're going to manage their current obligation without too many problems. And since they work a lot with partnerships, they have long-term partnership established, and they know these partnerships are going to generate enough energy saving certificate for them to cover their obligation. So they don't need to go onto the market to buy any certificate anymore. I mean, that's a bit correct. I mean, that's most of it. And really, one last question, because I think I've overpassed my time. We do not have certification for third-party actors, but it's quite a small word, and when someone is not doing a good work, it gets known quite well. I have no answer for how we can deal with low prices, and I think I'm going to stop now because I have other colleagues with very interesting presentation. Very many thanks for your questions, and maybe we can talk a bit later after the other presentations.
Okay, thank you very much, Elodie. You are a candidate for the prize for the most questioned speaker, of course. And thank you very much for being here with us, answering all these questions. Of course, there will be time to ask something more afterwards during at the end of our presentations, of course. So don't lose your hopes if you still have some questions from Elodie. By the way, another question was about the proceedings. I will show after my presentation how you can download them, so be assured that you will find them for this webinar, from the previous one, and for all ANSPOL activities, by the way. So now it's time of the second presentation of today from Mr. Ployner from the Austrian Energy Agency, and he will show lesson learned in his country. So please, Mr. Ployner, go on with your presentation. Thank you.
Hello, thank you. Welcome from our side. First of all, I have to excuse ourselves because we were told to say some words about the additionality as a additionality for buildings for building measures in Austria, and so we prepared 4 slides about the additionality, how we implement this in Austria. After the presentation, I may say some words to some lessons learned from Austria. Okay. I prepared 4 use cases for the to define how we implement the additionality. In our first use case, we have the calculation of the energy savings of new buildings. If a new building was built, we compare the energy demand of the new building with the energy demand of a legal requirement. So if an obligated party decides to set a subsidy on a better building performance, so the obligated party, if the obligated party decides to set a better building performance, you can this party can take the energy savings from this measure for this obligation to fulfill the targets. So in this first example, we have a single-family house which has a better building heating demand than the legal requirement and the Austrian building performance. And so in this case, the single-family house should have a heating demand of 50 kilowatt-hours per square meter and year, and the subsidy leads to a better heating demand of about 20 kilowatt-hours per square meter and year. And if you have a building of about 150 square meter and an efficiency rate of 120%, with this measure you can have the whole difference of the legal requirement to the real heating demand for your energy obligation to fulfill your energy saving target. The second case is a bit different because in the second case we have new heating systems, and new heating system also have a legal requirement. In this case, it would be the eco-design requirements, but in Austria we decided to, if there are market data available, we say measures, energy efficiency measure, which are not better than the market average, are not really energy efficiency measures. So in Austria we decided that if there are market data available, we calculate the energy savings, the energy demand difference between the market average and the efficient appliance. So in this case, we have a single family house at approximately 50 square meters per year, kilowatt hours per square meters in the year, with the same floor area as in the previous example. And we have the difference of the expenditure factors, of the efficiency rates. In our case, the average efficiency rate, so you can't compare it exactly to the seasonal efficiency rate of an heating device, because the expenditure factors, the expenditure factor includes more than just the device. It includes also the heat losses of the distribution system in the building. So in this case, our average heating system has approximately 120% of energy efficiency, and our efficient system is in this case a district heating system, which needs less final energy demand than the average heating system which is available on the market. Our third case is the refurbishment of buildings. In Austria, we say in the case of the refurbishment, we decide to take the whole difference of the energy of the heating savings, because without materiality, without, for example, subsidies, the building wouldn't be renovated. So if a subsidy forces or leads to a refurbishment, we take the whole difference of the heat demand before the renovation to the heat demand after renovation. And in our case, with the single family house, we have these 18,000 kilowatt hours per year. Our last case is the refurbishment of heating system, which is very similar to the refurbishment of the building, because in most of the cases there's no need to refurbish the heating system. So if you do, you are also able to take the whole savings of the difference of the new and the old system into account. In our case, we have the same building as before, with the 50 kilowatt hours per square meter and the 150 square meters. The difference is that we compare the new heating system with the existing one. So in our case, we have 4,500 kilowatt hours per year energy savings. This energy saving is a yearly based energy saving, which can be taken as the yearly energy saving into account to reach the target as an obligated energy supply, for example. For the notification to the European Commission, we calculate the cumulative energy savings out of the yearly energy savings. So this was my last use case. Now I try to say something to our lessons learned of our energy obligation system. I have to say that our obligation system is a really young one, because the whole obligation system started last year, and this year on the 14th of February it was the first time that the energy supplier had to report their measures to our monitoring system. So we have only a few lessons learned, but one of them is, for example, we have a very soft definition of legal requirements in our Energy Efficiency Act. So there's a lot of interpretation, a space of interpretation, which has a lot of discussion, which leads to a lot of discussions with obligated parties. So another problem, because of this very soft law requirements, is that all the obligated parties are very uncertain if their energy savings are really allowed, that all of their energy savings they calculated are countable for their energy efficiency target. Yeah, we have a lot of obligated parties. We have about approximately 600 obligated energy suppliers, and due to the fact that the energy suppliers that the energy supplier pass on their energy obligation to their consumers, and mostly on the companies, on energy consuming companies. We have a lot more than just only the energy suppliers, because all of the companies which take over which have to fulfill the energy saving obligation for their energy suppliers, they also are able to report their measures. Yeah, because of the combination of our obligation scheme and our alternative strategic measures, we have a very complex system. This means that we have a lot of possible double countings, because because we have in our strategic system we have a subsidy system which forces sometimes the same measures as the obligated parties. Yeah. And another big problem in our implementation was that we only a very short time period to implement the obligation system in Austria. Yeah. So this was a few words about our lessons learned. So I tried to answer some questions which may appeared in the chat. Okay, so the savings are elevated. No, the first question in the chat was about the real savings in comparison to calculated savings. In our system, in our obligation system, we mostly calculate the target, calculate the energy savings. We do not have a lot of measures which are really measured. So it is it makes the obligation system a bit simpler because you don't have to normalize the energy measuring. In the calculations you have to normalize it, so it is implemented. Okay. Okay. Are there any other questions?
Apparently not. Thank you for answering this one. And of course, participants have a possibility to ask more questions afterwards during the discussion. Thank you very much, Mr. Poiner. And now we can go on with first speaker, is Philippa Hulme from Opgen, regulator in UK. So she will explain something about their lesson learned with different schemes. Please, Philippa, go on. Philippa, we have problems in hearing you. Perhaps you have to near your mic. We see the presentation, but hear you quite at a distance. No, we can see a faint sound, but that's not understanding you. Perhaps there is something with the preferences of your audio in your PC. Okay, let's do a thing. I will give my presentation. In the meantime, we'll try to solve the problem with Philippa. So see you in a moment. And coming back to me.
Ok.
Per favore, cerca di far partire. Okay. Okay, here we are again. Okay, so let's speak about the Italian situation. We have 3 national schemes dealing with energy efficiency in Italy. The first one is the white certificate scheme, that perhaps is the most widely known among European countries, and it's a wide scheme that allows any type of energy efficiency project to be considered. When we have 2 other schemes, the first one is tax deduction schemes that is aimed mainly at the residential sector, and it allows to present projects dealing with the building envelope and heating plants and also renewable energy sources. It pays 65% of incurred costs with some maximum threshold, by the way, and these expenses can be recovered in 10 years after the expenses have been done. I'm sorry, I have to change my here you are with the presentation, sorry for that. And the first scheme is the heat account scheme, that is aimed both of the public sector, for which it covers thermal renewable energy sources and energy efficiency, both for the building envelope and the heating systems. And it covers also for the residential sector interventions dealing with thermal renewable energy sources. So, for example, solar thermal, heat pumps, biomass-powered boilers, and so on. So there are 3 very different schemes. I will focus mainly on the white certificates, but I will also tell you something about the main lesson learned from the other 2 schemes. Just words to remind you that our white certificate scheme is, of course, an energy efficiency obligation. The obliged parties are electricity and gas distributors with more than 50,000 clients. There is a tradable market that allows non-obliged parties, usually referred as voluntary parties, to sell the certificates they get by implementing energy efficiency actions to obliged parties. So the obliged parties have a flexibility degrees, since they can both implement directly the energy efficiency measures, or they can buy the certificates on the market. This way, the white certificate schemes also act as a sort of incentive for the voluntary parties that can get money by selling the white certificates, and so this way they can boost the interest of end users in implementing energy efficiency actions. Voluntary parties are ESCOs and energy service providers, and also companies with an energy manager or an energy management system in place. So it is quite a lot of people. We don't allow associations, something like that, and we don't allow usually residential end users, not because they are forbidden to participate, but because there is a minimum threshold on the project that can be presented that usually make it impossible to present a project for a residential end user. Every white certificates correspond on 1 to 1 ton of oil equivalent of additional savings. So these are the main facts of the schemes. Whereas we target very much during these 11 years of working scheme. We started with 200 kiloton of oil equivalent in 2005, and this year we have 7.6 million ton of oil equivalent. So a very important and consistent target for our country. The additionality is based on market regulatory baseline So that means we consider the minimum requirements, especially in the civil sector, but we also consider the technologies that are usually sold in the market. So of course we have to be higher than that to get the certificates. And more recently we also started to consider an economic baseline by considering a minimum payback time allowed in order to get to the scheme. There are three main procedures to assess the savings. The first one is deemed saving files, so this is the simplest one. Savings are recognized with respect to the installed units, that can be installed kilowatt hours, installed square meters, installed units, depending on the technology you are considering. There are scaled savings in which you have at least to measure some quantities, and then there is an algorithm that links these quantities to the savings. For example, it is applied for district heating or centralized heating in condominiums. And it's anyway a simplified procedure, since the applicant knows from the file how the baseline, the additionality, the algorithm have to be dealt with. Then there is the metering saving procedures that is done in two different steps. The applicant has to present a first proposal that is called PPPM, in which he proposes how to measure the savings. So we need meters that are mandatory, at least one, the algorithm to be used, the baseline, the additionality, and of course a description of the project. This is a very flexible possibility, even if it is complex and required some time to get understood by the operators in the market. And let's say that both scaled savings and metered savings had the advantages of giving us the real savings that were achieved in the single by the single measures. In the meter savings, after the PPPM is approved by the managing authority, that is a GSE, then the proponent can apply for a request for certificates, as it happens directly with deemed saving and scaled savings. Now, an important fact is that we started mainly with deemed savings in the civil sector in the first years. Now the system works with 85% of the savings metered, so complex savings, and more or less 80% of the projects are industrial projects in terms of savings achieved, not in terms of presented proposals, that are still more in the civil sector. So this is an important thing, and we can see that the scheme has changed a lot since its start. Another point is the ESCOs have been the main actor during this year. More or less 96% of the projects are presented by ESCOs. ESCOs in general, so we will have to be certified ESCOs starting from July 2016, but until now they can be energy service provider, even simple consultants. So they are an actor that present the projects on behalf of the end users. Either because the end user doesn't have a capability to present it directly, or because the end user doesn't have a project that is large enough to reach the minimum threshold size, or finally because simply the end user prefers to have an ESCO to present the project, to share the risk with them. If we consider, instead of a number of proposals, the entity of the savings, we see that 70% of the projects are presented by ESCO, 25% comes from companies with an energy manager. Of course, the remaining 5% comes directly from the distributors. So, voluntary parties in Italy played the main role in the scheme. And this is the reason why our tradable market is a very important feature in these schemes, and also we will see that it is very important to put together the targets, that is the demand of the system, and therefore the capability of the offer, the supply, to present and projects in within the scheme. Another important, very important point is that since we started with 200 kilotons of oil equivalent, now we have 7.6 million of kilotons of oil equivalent, and we started with hundreds of or tens of proposals, and we now deal with last year more than 10,000 proposals. It is obvious that there is an important role for the managing authority. In the beginning, the energy authorities, that was the first managing authorities, just needed 3-4 persons to manage the scheme. After a few years, they needed the support from other agencies, so they involved ENEA and later REC in order to get support in evaluating the proposal. And then since 2013, when GSC became the managing authorities, we had a lot of people dealing with the scheme. And by the way, I put growing in brackets because, okay, usually the number of proposals rise over the years. But for example, we had the peak till now in 2014, more in 2015, with considering both RVCs and PPPMs, around 50,000 of proposals to be evaluated by the managing authority during the year. This year we have been a little bit lower. We are about 12,000 proposals considering both RVC and PPPMs. That means, of course, you need to have a lot of flexibility in involving people within the managing authorities in order to really deal with the schemes. Consider that, of course, you have important deadlines, usually 60 days, in order to evaluate the proposal and give an answer to the applicants. The last 2 points. The first one is that we deal with all kinds of possible energy efficiency projects in all the sectors. This means a lot of flexibility, of course, but also to deal with very, very different projects. And whereas when you consider demand and scaled savings, there is an effort from the managing authorities to create the demand savings and scaled savings files. So first, by implementing a market survey to understand how the baseline of additionality can be calculated, then to understand also with the typical working hour, perhaps differentiated depending on the type of end user, let's say hospitals, residential users, industrial users, or for example, the typical activities for industrial users like 1 turn, 2 turn, 3 turns processes and so on. But when you speak of 85% of saving metered and 82% comes from metered savings procedures, that means that you should have employees and professionals capable of understanding the proposal that are put in front of you, that can pass from more efficient building envelope to a very deep renovation of industrial processes with particularities typical of that particular sector. Let's say the chemical sector, which you typically find a very different situation, very different processes among different users. The last point is the controls are required in order to avoid frauds, in order to ensuring that you're accounting the right savings, and have been mainly documented till now, but on-site controls are rising, and these are a very important point. So, what we learned from this basic figure? First of all, I have just to remind you some important points on the Italian scheme. The first one is that we usually recognize the certificates for 5 years. There are exceptions. For example, high efficiency cogeneration gets the certificate for 10 years, and building envelopes interventions get certificates for 8 years. But the usual situation is we reckon the certificates for 5 years. Since 2009, if I remember well, I've introduced a multiplier, the tau coefficient, that allows to keep into account future savings. There were two main ideas behind this choice. The first one is to favor more complex projects, because in the first years we had mainly simplified projects, dim-saving files, so lamps, double glazes windows, something like that. So the energy authorities said, okay, what if we try to keep into account future saving, so giving a higher recognition to complex projects. Second point, since in the civil sector, that was the main used in those years, the additionality is very high because they're related mainly to the minimum requirements. The problem was that usually the impact of the white certificates in terms of money given with respect to the capital expenditures needed to implement the particular projects were very low, usually among 2–5%. So there were no this important stimulus for the different operators and users to join the scheme. With the tau factor, everything changed, because, for example, a project with an expected technology lifespan of 20 years will get almost 4 times the certificates it used to get with the previous rules. The effective value is not 4, it's 3.36 in this case, because there is a 200 annual discount factor to be taken into account. Now, the tau coefficient was really effective in raising the expectations from the scheme and in raising the interest from the different parties in joining the scheme. Perhaps it was not so effective in raising the effective savings, but more than that, it gave us a real issue, considering that the problem is what happens if, let's say, a company fails in the 8th year. Since the tau coefficient keeps into account future savings, the problem is that the proponent has to give back the money that is linked to the tau coefficient from year 9th to year 20th. This is not an easy thing to manage, because if the company fails, of course, the problem is who can get the money from, first. Second, if the same company doesn't fail, perhaps better for that, but decide to change the project, for example, to change its processes or change the building, what happens? It is the same issue from GSE. It has to recover part of the money. And this is even worse if the proponent is an ESCO, because in that case, most often, the ESCO got 3, 5, perhaps 10% of the total value of the certificates. But of course, the other part, the main part, the ESCO gave to the end users. So the ESCO is asked for giving back the money, but the money has to be recovered by the ESCO from end users. So this is a huge complexity that can be solved in 2 ways. The first one is to avoid introducing a coefficient that recognizes future savings. By the way, it's just sufficient to say this is a simple multiplier. We give a premium to certain projects because we think they deserve it for some reasons. without mentioning that it is for future savings. That would be sufficient to avoid this. On the other hand, this raises another problem, that is how we deal with the responsibilities when a third party is involved in the project. And we had many issues in the last years with that. Second important point to be understood is that we consider a scheme in which the tradable market plays an important role. Of course, there is the problem of the price. We already seen it with Elodie in her presentation. She said we now have in French half the value we used to have in the previous years. In Italy, more or less happened the opposite. In the first year, thanks to the availability of a lot of quite simplified and very convenient projects, for example, compact fluorescent lamps, it was quite easy to present projects, and we had really an oversupply of certificates. That took us to have, especially for electricity saving, a price that fell down 30 euro per ton of equivalent, with respect to the 80 euros of ton of equivalent we started with. So one of the issues from the managing authorities and the ministry in that case, so the policymaker, was how we deal with that. Of course, the simplest approach is to raise the targets, but then you have to ensure that when you decide to stop all this simplified project, for example, because you consider that the baseline has to be risen because the technology is widespread, then you have to ensure that other projects will be able to fill the gap. The ministry decided to raise the targets, and this way it ensured also that we passed in a few years from a situation of oversupply to a situation of shortage. Okay, that was good for the market, of course, and the voluntary parties, because the price raised from 30 euros for ton of equivalent to 110, 120 euros for ton of equivalent. After many years, we found ourselves in an equilibrium situation. So prices have been steady in between 2011 and 2015 in the range 100 to 115 euro per ton of oil equivalent. That was a very good situation, because a stable market with stable rules, the operators in the meanwhile quite understood how to deal with complex procedures, with metered savings, and so the system has been working very well in the last 5 years, let's say so. Then some new challenge became to emerge in the last 2 years, depending on the issue I will explain to you in a few moments. What you can see now is that there is a trend there was a trend in the next months for a rising price of the white certificates. Till now has been demanding 10 euros per ton of equivalent, but there are possibilities that we continue, and that is because last year we got in the market more or less 30% less white certificates than the year before. That was far what was expected, perhaps due to the change that was introduced in the guidelines at the end of 2012. But nonetheless, it changed the equilibrium between demand and supply. We have good hopes that in the next future the new project will normalize the situation, but nonetheless, considering that in 2016 there will be a huge increase of the target, we will face some problems, I think, in the short future. So, what are the main lessons learned? The first one it is a very important one. There is the need for adapting the managing authorities to the requirements of the rising targets. So you can start with few people and you will find yourself with tens of them needed in order to manage the scheme. And by the way, if you decide to interrupt the use of a scheme at a certain point of time, you will have a lot of people that need to find a replacement somewhere else. So perhaps this is a future issue, but the problem of dealing with the rising targets is a present issue. So when you decide to start such a scheme, you have to make plans on how to deal with rising persons dealing with measurement and verification activities. Second point, you need policymakers that are capable to change rules according to how things change and react quite fast, because things can change really fast in these schemes. You can find in 1-2 years a situation that is really different from what it used to be, due, for example, to different reaction for the supply side or the demand side, or due to unexpected availability of certificates on the market, for example. So how to deal with these issues? No issues can rise for the control side, because if the controls shows that there are a lot of frauds, of course we have to take measures against that, and perhaps we will find a more complex rule in a short time, and so more complexity and more barriers for the operators to join the scheme. Second point, as LOD told you before, there is the need for large information and training campaigns. So you need to spend money for that, because if you don't do it, you will find and face troubles with rising targets. Now, if you have luck, and we have in the first years, to have a very easy to understand, easy to deal with, and very cost-effective measures to be implemented, that can work in the beginning. And so perhaps you don't need, in that case, a lot of information campaigns. But as soon as you have to face with meter savings, for example, complex procedure or innovative projects, then that information and training campaigns becomes fundamental. In Italy, what we saw is that only after an important training campaigns implemented by FIRA with EMEA in the last years, we saw really rise the presence of ESCOs in the market with meter savings proposals. Third point, both demand saving files, scaled files, and measured savings are needed for a scheme to work. Usually, the simplified procedures are very good to start with. But if you will to reach important targets with respect to the energy consumption in your countries or in a particular region, when perhaps you have to give space to more complex projects, and in that case you need something like metering procedures. You can find many ways to implement it, but you need them. Another point is the time coefficient. I already explained you of the issue we had with that, and I will say in the next slide how we will deal with that soon. How to deal with ESCOs and the third parties in terms of responsibilities. Perhaps this is not a problem of regulations, it's a problem of how third parties and the end users manage their contracts and agree among responsibilities. During our training courses, we tried to make aware of the operators of the possible issues coming from simplified agreements between ESCOs and end users. But that wasn't enough. The fact that in the first years there weren't enough controls or failures or something like that spread the convictions that okay, it's not that a problem. I just make a simplified deal with the end user. Let's say, okay, I will get this percentage for allowing you to get the money from the certificates, and that's it. And you give me, of course, the required information to present the project and present the yearly request with the metered data. But that wasn't enough, because of course, if the company, the end user fails, the end user changes something in the project, etc., it's a problem for the ESCO. It has the responsibility to deal with that, and the responsibility to give money back to the GSC if required. And of course, the ESCO can ask me money to the end users, but that means the agreement between the ESCO and the end user has to be very solid. Another point is that the target play an important role, and they should be accompanied by flexibility clauses. That means, for example, in our scheme, of course, each distributor have its personal target for a given year, but there will be penalties only if it isn't able to reach 60% of that target. It has the possibility to reach over 40% in the next year, of course, by adding that 40% to the next year target. So this is important, because this way, provided that there are enough certificates on the market to reach this 60% threshold, the distributors, in this case, of course, they can be suppliers, won't face the issue of dealing with penalties. And this is especially important if your obliged parties are distributors and not suppliers, because in that case, they really couldn't have a much active role in the scheme. Instead, you can ask suppliers to have an active role, and so dealing with the shortage by being more active in proposing and implementing energy efficiency actions. By the way, why we chose distributors and not suppliers? That is the most common solutions. That's because the scheme was designed in 2001. Just after the start of the liberalization of the electricity and gas market. So, in fact, we didn't have at those time enough players in those markets, enough suppliers to be involved in the scheme. And also, being in the beginning of the liberalization, we didn't know what will happen with suppliers in a few years. Should they go into merge, leaving only some large players, or there will be a situation with a lot of small players. So this is the reason why distributors were chosen. It can be perhaps easier for certain points. For example, you know where your distributor is, how to deal with it, how to find it if necessary, and so on. But on the other hand, of course, you can't expect a very active role from distributors due to the fact that they cannot intervene after meters in many countries for, of course, antitrust regulations. Another point is that simplified procedures like limit saving files are quite easy to use. So usually they are thought as a very valuable solution, and of course they are. But you have to be careful that if the design of a single limit saving file is not good enough, that can lead to consistent troubles. For example, we have two examples, one with UPS and another one with biomass-powered greenhouses in the agricultural sector. I will just say 2 words about the UPS case. When the market service was done about UPSs, of course, all the existing UPS operators were considered, the technological target data of the products existing on the market was considered, and also it was evaluated what the typical efficiency on new products sold on the market were. And that took to the creation of a certain demand saving file and a certain amount of savings recognized for a given number of UPS units installed. What happened then was that some companies, borderline companies, let's say so, decided to put into the market very inefficient solutions that were not available previously in our market. I said, okay, these inefficient solutions are really cheap, and the amount of money they cost is less than the amount of money you can get from white certificates. So we'll try to give them for free to the users. It doesn't work. It doesn't matter if the user uses them, but we will get more money that we will spend. So the issue with this file was that it wasn't working very well with efficient UPSs because the impact of the white certificates on the capex was not that good. But it created this, let's call, fraud due to the fact that the minimum requirements in terms of efficiency were not specified in a convenient manner. And that was due to the fact that when the file was implemented, who created it just thought about what was in the market. Well, that sometimes it's not enough. So be ready to monitor the situation and take the appropriate action if needed. It's not a problem when we will find issues with a certain simplified procedure or certain aspect of your scheme, of course. The only problem is to be able to react as fast as you can to the troubles in order to confine it in a small account. So the last point is the importance of reliable and well-defined consumption baselines and the isolation of savings due to energy efficiency projects. This is really important when you consider industrial projects, because in the civil sector it's quite easy to deal with how you have to calculate the savings, how you have to deal with the baseline and so on. Whereas in the industrial sector, this can be quite complex. And it requires time also for the managing authorities to really understand how you can get the best from it. So, of course, we need to consider some further steps of regulations to deal in the right way with these important issues. So now some information about what we have to expect from the new guidelines. And this is in order to answer some of the issues that I explained to you. The first one, no more tau coefficient. There will be a different duration for the white certificate. So if I have a 15 years expected technological lifetime, I will get certificates for 15 years. So no issue. If a company fails, if a company decides at a certain point to change the project, it simply stops to get the certificates, but it will retain all the certificates it got before. Second, a new evaluation methodology. In order to improve the usability of meter savings, there will be a simplified monitoring plan procedure to, in particular, facilitate the coverage of more standardized meter saving projects. Let's say if I implement, I don't know, a particular type of project in a certain sector, let's say I change a particular piece of process in the paper industry. What we have to do with the present rules is that if you decide to implement 10 projects in 10 different clients, usually you have to present 10 different BPPMs. every time stating the differences among these clients. With a new procedure, it should be possible to present just one proposal in which, of course, the proponent explains how to take into account the difference that can arise among different clients, provided that there is enough standardizations among the intervention they are going to do. Then there will be a strict evaluation of the ex-ante consumption, because sometimes it was accepted an ex-ante baseline evaluated, for example, on 1 month of measurements due to the lack of opportunities. Now it will be enforced to have a baseline of 12 months of measurements. This is to ensure even more that the meter savings are real savings and keeps into account the relevant information. There will be new rules for keeping into account the responsibilities with ESCOs as proponents, and so we'll put something within the new guidelines to ensure that in case that there will be problems related to a project with an ESCO and end users, the GSE can get the money back without many issues. There will be also increased controls, and by the way, the GSA put an effort in transparency, and since last year we have a website in which we can see how many controls have been done in the white certificate scheme and also in the other scheme that the GSC manages, like for example the heat account, if speaking with energy efficiency. And we can also have a figure of how many controls procedure get bad results. So found problems with the project, unconformities, and so on. This will improve even more the transparency of the project. By the way, market prices are all transparent, both if the transactions happens on the spot market and if they happens on bilateral agreements. And so this is an important point. Secondly, as in French, we recognize the importance of involving the stakeholders in the definition of the new guidelines. This is no in order to ensuring that we take into account all their requests, of course, but the idea is that this way the managing authorities, the policymakers, the Ministry of Economic Development in our case, can learn much more from the barriers, from the problems that the operators faces, and also can learn some possible solutions. Because the more people can share ideas, the more possibility to find a nice way to write the new guidelines. And secondly, because this increase the transparency of the process. The main issues we had in this scheme was related to change of rules, unexpected change of rules, that of course are not liked from the market operators and not from banks, for example, or financial operators, because they put a lot of pressure. Okay, I'm going to invest some money in this project. I imagine to get this money from the white certificate scheme. What happens if I present a good project, but, for example, in the meantime, rules change and I will remain without money? Or, even worse, I have to give some money back? No, that has to be avoided. And a good involvement of the stakeholders can reduce to maximum these issues. The main, anyway, in lesson learned from our scheme was that the scheme cannot be born perfect. You need a continuous care. You need to intervene with modifications and improvement time by time. So let's say every 2-3 years, usually 4 years, it is okay. But anyway, what we experienced was that after a certain amount of years, even if apparently the scheme is working well, if you don't produce something, you will face some troubles in the coming years. That's because you need an equilibrium for the scheme to work well. And so you have to carefully monitor what is happening in the market, what is happening with your obliged parties, with voluntary parties, and also with trends in technologies and so on. So this is more or less what I wanted to share with you. Now I will dedicate myself to your question, if I found one. So the first one. Have you an estimate of the share of white certificates achieved in the ATS sector? By the way, the Italian scheme allows, as many others, not the French one, the possibility to present projects also in the emission trading scheme. In fact, we don't have an exact figure on that. But consider that in the industry that presented projects are in many cases under the ETS directive or regulations, because both because the sector is covered by the ETS directive, or because they implemented something dealing with cogeneration or large heating plants over the threshold considered by the ETS directive. So I don't have an exact figure, but it's an important share for that. Is the tau factor applicable to all operations in Italy? Or only to certain categories? No, it is applied to all categories. Of course, it changes a lot because it can be one when the technologies you consider have an expected lifetime that is in the order of 5, 6, 7 years. It can be 3.36 cases in most cases. The average, I think, is around 3. And the maximum amount is given for a 25 years lifetime, but that applies only for a very particular technology, and I think no one has ever presented it. In the new guidelines, there are no certainties yet, but perhaps the maximum duration will be 15 years. Then, okay, apparently there are no other questions.
No questions from you. Philippa, she has problems.
Oh, unfortunately, despite our efforts, we didn't succeed in involving Philippa from the OFGEN. We will share her presentation if she agrees with that, but she wasn't able to solve the problems with the mic. I don't know why. Sometimes it can happen, of course. But anyway, we will give you her presentation. Oh, there is another question. I can see it. Okay. No question anymore for my presentation. So please, if you have any question about the general aim of this webinar, so about lesson learned that you will ask to all the speakers you have today, please feel free to do it. theoretically we reached the end of the webinar, but we have still some minutes if you want. In the meantime, I will just show you some things about the ENSPO project that can be useful for you. So the first one, you will find the ESPOL website at espol.eu. First, under the Events tab, you will find, for example, a webinar tab under which you will find the proceeding of our webinars. Presently, there are the ones of the last 2 webinars, so you will find the presentation here. I think in a few days you will find also a presentation for today's webinar. Besides these webinars, there will be the important European Observatory that will take place on the 16th of March in The Hague, in the Netherlands. So I hope you can be able to join it. You will find information here on the agenda and how to join this meeting if you can and if you are interested in it. We will go into more details on the issues we explained and shared in these 2 webinars, and in the third one that will come in a week, next Tuesday. And finally, under the Results tab, you will find all the reports that have been implemented under this project. In particular, you will find a detailed description of all the existing and the planned schemes, both energy efficiency obligation schemes and alternative measure schemes. So we will find really a lot of information on that. In this webinar, there is no time to go into details on the single schemes because, of course, we need all the webinars for each of them. But please refer to these reports because they are really comprehensive and they give you a lot of information about what is happening, and what you will find among the European countries. And also there is some information about energy efficiency obligation existing outside the European Union. And of course, on the project you can join our newsletter to get and to remain and keep in touch with us and to remain informed on our activities. Another point is the policy briefs, in which we try to synthesize the main lesson learned from the existing scheme. So please refer also to them to get more information. Another question. In the Netherlands, the Dutch government is considering an obligation on energy suppliers. The target group is private house owners. Our concern is that people are not willing to accept technical changes to their houses. They are not obliged to cooperate. How does one make sure that the end user cooperates? Well, like Elodie said before, nobody can ensure this. It's a question both on how interesting it is the economic incentive that will come through the scheme to the end user. The second point is the trust that the end user have with respect to their proponents. In this case, there will be energy suppliers. So there is no a yes or no answer. There will be possibilities. What I like to underline is that, at least in our countries, but I think in many others, the electricity and gas suppliers already started some years ago to try to sell energy efficiency together with electricity and gas, so with the commodities. And that's because the margins of the commodities were shrinking due to the competition and due to the reduction of the demand that followed the financial crisis. So energy efficiency becomes an important tool to rise these margins and to ensure that these subjects can continue to make profit from their activities. So if we put together this opportunity. That is, by the way, the same you perhaps witnessed with in the mobile phone market, in which once upon a time they sell you just the traffic, and afterward they started selling you the mobile phone together with the traffic. That was the same idea. Try to make profit in a system in which there is a rising competition. So perhaps you will offer the suppliers an alternative to transform their businesses with the help of some regulation. So we can perhaps see it in this way. But of course, it depends really a lot on your suppliers and the end user. So I suggest here an important information campaign on the end users, and also some support to your suppliers in order to help them to provide interesting solutions, both technologically and economically. The last point we can say about this is that if we implement energy efficiency measures in a building, of course it can be a nuisance for the occupiers. But also, after the intervention, we will have a building that has a higher value because it has a higher energy efficiency class. So why not use it as a leverage to convince the end users in satisfying their requests from the suppliers? So that will be my answer. I don't know if the other speaker will have something on it. On this point. Well, no?
Yes, Dario,
No.
maybe I can just add something. This is Elodie from France.
Yep.
I completely agree with you that you need to ensure proper communication towards our households. For now, I think in France, the energy saving certificates mainly rely on the current energy refurbishment dynamic, I guess, as it is. People tend to refurbish their home, and what we do is that we have them start it earlier or go for more energy performance operations, or go through, hire professional installers instead of doing the refurbishment themselves, so that kind of things. And maybe another idea linked to our new energy transition law is that it is not compulsory to refurbish your home, but at some point, if you don't do so, it's going to become a problem. And one of the items of our energy transition law, is to say that after 2025, building with a very low energy performance won't be able to be lent. So you won't be able to rent housing if it's really not energy performant enough. So you don't have to refurbish your apartment, but if you don't, 10 years from now, you're not going to be able to rent it anymore. So yes, at some point, people have to refurbish, and in this case, we need to give them the right direction in order to implement the more energy efficient operations. That's an additional answer.
And of course, if the householders doesn't care nothing about energy efficiency, for example, because they pay very low fares or something like that, that will be a problem. But sometimes you will find surprises when you start with schemes and you see that things go much differently than you expected. A lot of barriers and of issues that we expect to find when dealing with actions actually can disappear. Of course, it can happen also the opposite, but we also have many experiences in many countries in which we saw that, for example, threshold that was thought as impossible to reach by the relevant stakeholders were very easily obtained in the market almost immediately. So, of course, it depends on a lot of on the framework, or on the price the end user pays for the energy, and on many other points and variables. But I think with the right regulation and the right involvement of the stakeholders, you can get good results. If you have fear that the targets won't be achieved in a short time, consider, as I said in my presentation, some flexibility clauses. So give the obliged parties the possibility to recover the part of savings we're not able to realize immediately in the coming years. You can do it, for example, in 2-3 years time. This way, there will be we will have enlarged opportunities to work and also to develop their activities. They won't be oppressed by the need and requirement to get to the target soon in order to avoid penalties. This is another possibility, and perhaps I suggest this flexibility option for all the schemes, because it can really help. Otherwise, you will have to be very careful and good at deciding the targets for your country, and that's not an easy task, I assure you. So I think this is all. Thank you very much for your participation. I kindly used to fill the survey that you will find just after the end of the webinar, in order to let us know if this webinar has been useful, if it can be improved, and so on. I really thank the speakers to have been here with us and share their very important and valuable experiences. And we will give, of course, to Elodie the prize for the most questioned speaker. So thank you very much, and see you in the next and coming events from the ESPOL website. Here you have them, the next webinar next week, the second ESPOL Youth Observatory meeting, and also many national activities in the partners country. Thank you, and see you next time. Bye-bye.